Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 237, talking about evolution. The episode begins with Ash and the gang on a route to Mahogany Town as per usual, as Ash was boasting about how he was planning to eventually win the Pokemon League and all that typical shit, when he suddenly noticed that Pikachu was seeming sick, and Misty pointed the same thing out regarding her Togepi, and they questioned why their Pokemon were suddenly so ill. Ash suggests that it was probably just a common cold that the both of them had developed, but Misty doubted this, as she felt that Togepi didn't seem to have a fever or any sniffles or anything like that. So the sickness must have been something different. As for Brock, he was more concerned about getting to Mahogany Town, and he declared that they seemed to be lost, as he had seen this part of the path that they were walking on before, and this was confirmed as they then ended up back in the forest that they had just come out of. Since they were in a forest, guess what happened next? A whole bunch of bug Pokemon, such as a Caterpie, Weedle, and Spinarak, dropped down from their string shots near Misty, which frightened her. However, Brock told her not to be frightened, as they appeared sick as well, just as Misty's Togepi and Ash's Pikachu. Just then, an Oddish and Rattata came out of the bushes, as well as a Sandshrew, and the three of them seemed sick as well, leaving Ash and the gang to question what the fuck was going on, and believed that something in the area could have been making all the Pokemon sick. Just then, their thoughts are interrupted when they hear a massive roar. They go to the source of the roar, which sounded like it was coming from the banks of a lake that was up ahead. So, they go to the lake, which Brock identifies as the Lake of Rage with his guidebook, and suggests that the lake may have been what was making the Pokemon sick, if the water in it was polluted or something, and the Mons used the water for drinking water. Ash and the gang questioned this, because Pikachu and Togepi hadn't drank out of the lake water, but Brock retorted that since they had gotten lost, they may have drank out of that lake and not even known it. Brock then suggests that the roar that sounded like it was coming from the lake could have been from a Pokemon that was getting hurt by something in the lake, and that could have been what was making the Pokemon sick. So Ash and the gang try and look around for the Pokemon that had roared, and they are then startled as a Gyarados pops out of the lake. They weren't just startled because it was an intimidating Gyarados, though. They were startled by the Gyarados' color, because it was red, meaning that it was shiny, just like Ash's Noctowl. Because of its red coloring, even though Ash and the gang were immensely terrified of it, they couldn't help but stay and stare at it. And as Brock examined it, being the breeder that he was able to determine that Gyarados seemed sick as well. Brock's examination was interrupted, though, as the Gyarados seemed angry and proceeded to fire a Hydro Pump at Ash and the gang. Thankfully, Ash and the gang were able to dodge out of the way, but they decided that because of this, they should get out of there as fast as possible, with Misty being the first one to suggest this, but Brock and Ash easily following. Ash and the gang could only walk a few steps, though, before they were stopped in their tracks by a group of criminals, which Ash was instantly able to recognize as Team Rocket due to their standard black uniforms and the R's on them. He then takes notice of the person in the middle of them, which appeared to be their boss, who we would later find out was named Tyson. He laughed evilly, questioning what the fuck Ash and the gang were doing by the lake, and warning them to move out of the way so that they didn't interfere with Team Rocket's plans. Before even giving Ash and the gang a chance to run away, though, Tyson then sent out his Fearow to attack them, leading Ash to send out Totodile to battle the Fearow as he orders it to use Water Gun. However, just like most of the other Pokemon around, Totodile then began to feel sick, rendering him unable to use the Water Gun. Because of this, Ash and the gang figured that it must have been something at the lake that was causing the sickness, but this was seemingly disproven as Fearow was unaffected, and proceeded to go in on Totodile with a Drill Peck, also hoping to hit Ash and the gang as well. Just before the attack could make contact, though, the Fearow was then knocked out of the air by a Thunder Wave attack. Everyone wonders where the attack came from, as the source then reveals themselves, a trainer and his Dragonite. The trainer quickly orders Ash and the gang to escape into the forest and get to safety, explaining that he would deal with Team Rocket. Ash and the gang do as the trainer commanded, as Ash also called back his Totodile. However, Tyson and the Team Rocket grunts tried their best to chase after Ash and the gang, but the trainer wasn't going to let this happen, as he then commanded his Dragonite to use Whirlwind, which sent Tyson and the grunts flying away. In fear of the Dragonite, Tyson and his grunts decide to retreat, though promise that they would be back. With Team Rocket dealt with for now, this allows the man to fly into the forest with his Dragonite and meet up with Ash and the gang. Ash instantly thanked the man for his help, and explained that they ended up in the area after getting lost on their way to Mahogany Town, and they had decided to check out the lake in hopes that it would help them discover why their Pokemon were sick, though added that Pikachu and Togepi had since begun to feel better after they retreated into the forest. While Ash was talking, Misty and Brock just stood there, shocked, as they recognized the man, and I'm sure you guys did as well if you watched The Legend of Thunder. And that's because this character was not just an ordinary trainer, he was the Johto champion, Lance. With Brock adding that Lance was the Indigo League champion as well, as he had won not only the main Indigo League conference years prior, but he had also beaten all of the Kanto Elite Four, even formerly being one himself. Essentially, Lance went like this. He started off as a regular trainer, then he became a champion of the Indigo League Conference, and then he became a Kanto Elite Four, and then he became the Kanto champion, and then he moved on to Johto, where he became the Johto champion as well. So Lance was definitely the strongest trainer that we've seen in the anime so far, since he was the champion of 2 goddamn regions. After Brock and Misty explained all this to Ash, Ash was now in amazement as well, as he recognized Lance as a Dragon Master, and also undefeatable at that, being one of his main inspirations to enter the Indigo League. Ash and the gang eagerly introduced themselves, with Ash stating that he wanted to be a Pokemon Master, as Lance confirms that he was in fact Lance, and wishes Ash luck in his goals. Not fully knowing what a Pokemon Master was, as not even Ash really knew entirely what it was, he just figured that a Pokemon Master was a very strong trainer, and someone who understood Pokemon. Anyways, Misty and Brock then question what someone as famous as Lance was doing out in the woods. leading Lance to reveal that he not only was he a Pokemon champion, but he was also part of an organization called the Pokemon G-Men, which was a detective organization that was out to catch people like Team Rocket that like to mistreat Pokemon. Clarifying that he had come to the area to investigate the Red Gyarados and also stop Team Rocket and whatever they were planning to do with it. Adding his theory that Team Rocket's plan also likely had something to do with the lake where the Red Gyarados was from. Ash states his wish to help the Red Gyarados and stop Team Rocket, but Lance refuses Ash's offer, politely stating that this operation would be far too dangerous for Ash and the gang to handle, especially since these Team Rocket members weren't your typical Team Rocket members. Especially Tyson, since he actually seemed to have brains in some way, unlike a lot of the grunts. Ash assures Lance that he's dealt with Team Rocket plenty of times before, but Lance reminds him that he likely just dealt with some pitiful grunts, and instead points Ash at a path out of the forest, which he said would take them straight to Mahogany Town. Although Ash did want to save the Red Gyarados, he also really wanted to go to his next gym battle, so Ash and the gang obliged to Lance's orders and went down the path to Mahogany Town as Lance thanked them for listening and wished them all the best, wishing Ash luck on his goal to become a Pokemon Master. Speaking of useless Team Rocket grunts, Team Rocket had found themselves lost in the same forest that Ash and the gang currently were in, and they were extremely tired, hungry, and annoyed as fuck as Wobbuffet kept forcibly popping out of its Pokeball, forcing Jessie to recall it. They were also annoyed due to the constant stress they were under now of Delibird and him potentially coming to collect their debt, and they were stressing about the fact that they didn't have any money since they never were able to win against Ash and the gang and take any of his Pokemon. They soon stop in the forest out of pure exhaustion, but then Meowth turns to his left and spots what he thinks is a farmhouse. Team Rocket then come to the conclusion that if there was a farmhouse, then there obviously must be some crops of some kind inside, or some meat from the cattle or some shit, so they decide to go to the farmhouse, or at least what they thought was a farmhouse, and retrieve the food, getting their energy back out of pure excitement to go get the food. Unbeknownst to Team Rocket, though, this building was not a farmhouse, but a Team Rocket HQ, and inside, Tyson was talking to yet another character from The Legend of Thunder, Professor Sebastian, the Team Rocket professor that had worked on the whole crystal machine that was able to lure in Raikou. Anyways, as for what Tyson was talking to Professor Sebastian about, Tyson was congratulating Professor Sebastian on successfully creating some radio waves that were able to make the Red Gyarados evolve from a Magikarp. Essentially, Team Rocket's plan was to force Pokemon to evolve with this radio wave technology, so that they could reach their strongest forms faster, and their first test subject happened to be a Magikarp that was in the Lake of Rage, which had now evolved into a Gyarados. Anyways, Sebastian, being the self-centered bastard that he was pleased with himself as well for creating this awesome technology. However, even he had to remind Tyson that his technology wasn't perfect when Tyson suggested that they should simply just go ahead and create an evolved Pokemon army already and use the radio waves on more Pokemon. Sebastian clarified that although that indeed was the goal, to create an entire army of powerful evolved Pokemon, his technology clearly wasn't sufficient enough yet because they had tried to make other Pokemon evolve by making them sick with the radio waves, but all of those attempts had failed. This in turn revealed that the reason why Pikachu, Togepi, and Totodile and all the other Pokemon were sick was because of Sebastian's radio waves that he was sending, trying to make them evolve. Although the radio waves seemed to have only made the Pokemon sick, as opposed to making them evolve, so Sebastian knew that the technology had to be perfected so that he could save his reputation as Team Rocket's top professor. So, with that, he ordered Tyson to capture the Red Gyarados so that they could further study it to see what made the Red Gyarados different from the rest of the Mons that allowed the Gyarados to evolve, but not the other Mons. Stating that if he found out what made the Red Gyarados different from the rest of the Mons, then he would be able to perfect his radio wave technology to make the other Mons be able to evolve as well. With that, Tyson simply declared that he was going to go capture the Red Gyarados. But Sebastian clarified that it wouldn't be that simple, as capturing the Red Gyarados would require Tyson to go down to the bottom of the lake, and he said that Tyson probably wouldn't be able to achieve this, due to Team Rocket not having the equipment currently available to go down that far into the lake. So, Sebastian instead suggested to Tyson that, as opposed to going down into the lake, that he should find a way to lure Gyarados to the surface of the lake, so it would be easier to capture. Also, if it was on the surface, it would be easier for Sebastian's radio waves to reach it once again, so that he could therefore research the radio waves' effects on an evolved Pokemon as well. Just then, Sebastian and Tyson's conversation was interrupted by a Team Rocket grunt who instructed Sebastian and Tyson to look at the security cameras on Sebastian's monitor, informing him that there were intruders. So, when Sebastian looked at the security cameras, he noticed none other than Jessie and James. They had been caught. Speaking of Jessie and James, they still thought that they were in a farmhouse until they realized how big the place was, and also noticed some Persian statues, which were lined up along a hallway. Team Rocket examined them, with Meowth obviously not being fond of them due to his distaste for Persian. And he claims that they look suspicious and were probably watching them. Unbeknownst to him, he was entirely right, as the Persian statues were how the cameras saw the hallway, with the cameras essentially being located inside of Persian's eyes. However, James doubted Meowth, thinking that they were probably just statues, and decided to touch one to prove this. However, the statue then starts glowing, and deploys some metal bars from the ceiling as a result, since apparently these statues functioned as not only security cameras, but an entire security system. Anyways, with Team Rocket now trapped by metal bars on both sides of them, Tyson had then come over to them to see who the intruders were after being informed by his grunt. Tyson demands to know their exact identities, leading Jesse and James to introduce themselves by doing their motto, with Wobbuffet also joining in, leading Jesse to forcibly recall Wobbuffet. Obviously, because of their motto, Tyson now knew that Jesse and James apparently belonged to Team Rocket, so he apologized for the misunderstanding and went to go free them. However, a Team Rocket grunt then came up to him, the same one from before, and informed him that he had checked the Team Rocket database and saw that they had just become Team Rocket members after being re-registered, and clarified that they had been demoted to rookies for making zero contributions to Team Rocket throughout their entire time there, as they hadn't been able to capture one single Pokemon successfully. Upon hearing that they had been demoted to rookies despite all their time in the organization, Jesse and James were obviously furious and tried to convince Tyson and the Grunt that they weren't in fact rookies and were actually some of Team Rocket's most important members. The Grunt and Tyson read the Team Rocket database to see if they missed something regarding Jesse and James, but all they found was a statement saying that Jesse and James would do any job for a meal. So this led Tyson to state that regardless of if Team Rocket truly were rookies or not, he wanted help with his mission, and clarified that if Team Rocket helped, then he would give them a big meal, and this obviously excited Jesse and James, along with the fact that it meant that they would be freed from the bars, so they accepted to help with the mission, not knowing what it was, as they were then treated to a huge Team Rocket banquet for just the two of them, and Wobbuffet, and Meowth. Tyson and the Grunt then left the kitchen where they had left Team Rocket so that they could enjoy their food in peace, and while Team Rocket ate their food, Tyson took the opportunity to go back to Professor Sebastian and ask him if he wanted any additional help with capturing Gyarados, stating that he had just recruited some new Team Rocket members into the mission. Sebastian clarified that the first part of the job of retrieving Gyarados would require some expandable Team Rocket members, since they would have to put their lives at risk to capture the Gyarados, and with that, Tyson knew that Jesse and James, who he still thought were rookies, would be the perfect Team Rocket members for that job, so he went back to the kitchen when Team Rocket had finished their meal, and explains to them that the mission he needed them to help him with was known as Project R, and took them to Professor Sebastian so he could explain the rest. Sure enough, Sebastian does explain what Project R was to Team Rocket, being the operation of capturing the red Gyarados, as well as using the radio waves on even more Pokemon. But Sebastian didn't want to bother the rookies with the details, so he just told Jesse and James that Project R overall would give Team Rocket more overall power, and specifically instructed Jesse and James to just worry about capturing a red Gyarados at the bottom of the Lake of Rage. Team Rocket were shocked at why they were being assigned such an important job, and were somewhat hesitant to do it due to being frightened by Gyarados. However, Sebastian didn't care, and simply told Team Rocket that Gyarados was at the bottom of the Lake of Rage, so they would have to dive down if they wanted to get it. Team Rocket were still hesitant though, so Tyson assured them that if they succeeded in capturing the red Gyarados, then they would forever go down in Team Rocket history, and their reputation would get a massive boost. Hearing this, Team Rocket were now fully convinced to capture the red Gyarados, wanting fame, and wanting to be recognized as real members as opposed to just rookies. Wobbuffet then forcibly pops out of its Pokeball again, forcing Jesse to recall it again. It was now time for the operation of capturing Gyarados at the Lake of Rage to begin, so several Team Rocket grunts were getting ready to load the boat that was going to be sent into the middle of the lake. However, as the Team Rocket grunt was loading several pieces of cargo and supplies onto the boat, Lance snuck up behind him at the perfect chance when the grunt wasn't looking, and knocked him out and stole his suit, disguising himself as a Team Rocket member, because just as Lance had promised, he was going to deal with Team Rocket himself and save the red Gyarados. And so, disguised and with the grunt still knocked out, Lance took the opportunity to get on Team Rocket's boat to head out into the Lake of Rage with them. Meanwhile, back with Ash and the gang, who were walking on the trail Lance had led them to on the way to Mahogany Town. Despite Ash wanting to get to his next gym battle, he did feel bad for leaving the red Gyarados behind, and wanted to go and rescue it, even if Lance did admit that it was dangerous, adding that he couldn't stand to see Pokemon sick or in pain, like the red Gyarados was. Misty tried to assure Ash that Lance probably had everything under control, being the champion, but Ash admitted that even if this was true, he couldn't stand not knowing for sure. Misty continued to try and talk Ash out of going back to save the Gyarados, but her efforts were useless, as Brock supported Ash, stating that since the Gyarados seemed angry since it was sick, that meant that it could try and harm other water Pokemon in the water as a result, and that could be disastrous for the ecosystem. Upon hearing this, even Misty decided to agree with Ash that they all needed to go back and do something to help Lance save the red Gyarados. So they headed back to the Lake of Rage. Speaking of the Lake of Rage, Team Rocket's boat has now arrived in the center of the lake, just above where Gyarados was apparently located. Sebastian, Tyson, and all the grunts stayed in the boat as they instructed Jesse, James, and Meowth to go down into the lake and dive. Before they dove, though, Team Rocket debated on how they were actually going to capture the Gyarados, with James suggesting that they should use Pokeballs, but Meowth denied this suggestion, explaining that the red Gyarados probably had to be kept wild so that Team Rocket could observe it in its natural habitat, so that they could observe what made it different from the rest of the Pokemon. Clarifying that if it was caught by a member of Team Rocket, then it may do as Team Rocket commanded, instead of what it was going to do naturally, which would defeat the entire purpose of the research. James and Meowth then dove in with no hesitation, though Jessie was hesitant, as she was scared of the red Gyarados, but she eventually dove in when she reminded herself that she would get a whole bunch of recognition from Team Rocket for this, including likely from Giovanni, since he had to have ordered the job to take place in the first place. Jessie also got extra motivation from her belief that not only would she get famous with Team Rocket, but if Team Rocket in general got famous from this whole incident, then she would be popular with maybe even the whole region, or even the entire world. However, as soon as Jessie arrived down in the water, she immediately became nervous once again, and saw that Meowth was also nervous. So, the two of them got the idea to have James, who still was not nervous whatsoever, to do the entire operation for them, as they commanded James to swim 70 meters forward, explaining that that's where they thought Gyarados was. James obliged without any questions, assuming that Meowth and Jessie were going to follow him, but when he looked back, he saw that they weren't, so he immediately went back to them and accused them of being scared. Jessie and Meowth lied that they were merely staying back to watch over James to make sure nothing happened to him, but James still believed they were scared, and told them that they shouldn't be afraid, explaining that he had gotten over his fear of Gyarados a long time ago after all of his incidents with Gyarados, such as when they were aboard the St. Anne during episode 15. Jessie and Meowth countered, though, that there was no way James wasn't scared of the Gyarados, which caused them to argue, and while they were arguing, they didn't notice the red Gyarados begin to approach them. They eventually hear something swimming towards them, though, so they turn around, though since it was so dark down in the depths of the lake, they only saw Gyarados' angry red eyes before seeing the rest of its whole red body as it began to chase after them, leading Team Rocket to try and escape back to the boat, as they swam back to the surface, with Jessie, James, and Meowth all admitting to each other that they were in fact scared of the red Gyarados after all. Team Rocket eventually retreated back by the boat, though still in the water, though Tyson was still pleased, as they had led the red Gyarados right to the boat. He remarked how he was surprised by this, not believing who he thought were rookies to be able to accomplish a goal like this, and tells some grunts to get ready to fire a torpedo at the Gyarados as soon as it was close enough, and when it was, the torpedo was launched, which deployed a net, capturing the red Gyarados inside. However, since the net was so big, Jessie, James, and Meowth, still being in the water at this point, were also caught in the net as well. Of course, Professor Sebastian didn't care about this, since he viewed Team Rocket as expandable, so he ordered a Team Rocket grunt to administer a lightning shock through the net to shock the Gyarados, which also shocked Team Rocket in the process. With Gyarados now weakened and the net attached to the boat, Team Rocket began to make their getaway as they drive their boat to the edge of the lake. However, Ash and the gang had just arrived at the lake to see this happening, so Ash took action to try and save the Gyarados by sending out his Totodile, and Misty helped as well, sending out her Poliwhirl. Poliwhirl and Totodile then swam to the net as it was dragging away both Gyarados and Team Rocket, and Totodile then got to the net and bit on it, though he also bit on Jessie's hair in the process, much to her anger, and Poliwhirl simply tried to rip the net open. Meanwhile, inside the boat, Lance, still disguised, had spotted Ash and the gang and thought that they were truly crazy for coming back despite his warnings. Tyson notices Ash and the gang as well and warns Professor Sebastian, but Sebastian was actually happy with this as he saw that Misty and Ash had Poliwhirl and Totodile and figured that he could use this opportunity to test out his radio waves on them to see if they would forcibly evolve. So, Sebastian made contact with some more Team Rocket grunts back at Team Rocket's base and commanded that they send out some radio waves using the giant radar that Professor Sebastian had built there. So, the grunts oblige and send out the radio waves, which affect Misty's Poliwhirl, Ash's Totodile, and also Meowth. Although the waves don't cause an evolution, the waves just cause the Pokemon to become tired, as Poliwhirl and Totodile let go of the net as a result, and Meowth simply starts acting strangely, which Jessie and James are obviously confused by, not understanding that waves were the problem. Seeing Totodile and Poliwhirl tired, Misty and Ash recall them into their Pokeballs from outside of the lake, and assumed that it was something in the lake that was causing this. However, they then noticed that the waves were now affecting Pikachu and Togepi as well, which makes them realize that the lake wasn't at fault, since Pikachu and Togepi were outside of it. Brock and Ash are then able to physically see the waves being emitted from the radar at Team Rocket's base, and come to the conclusion that it was in fact these waves making their Pokemon extremely tired. So they begin to make their way over to the base, but they were stopped in their tracks by Tyson, who had been ordered by Professor Sebastian to capture Ash and the gang after weakening their Pokemon with the waves, and then take them back to the boat. So Tyson did just this by throwing restrictive rings around Ash and the gang, capturing them, and then he ordered his grunts to haul them back to the boat, which they were able to do by utilizing a mini life raft that they had deployed from the boat. As the raft returned to the boat, Jessie, James, and Meowth, who were still in the net, spotted this and laughed that Ash and the gang were finally captured. And were talking about the fact that now that they had helped capture the red Gyarados, they would go down in Team Rocket history and be known as way more than rookies. Anyways, the restrained Ash and the gang are then taken onto the boat, where they're immediately given to Professor Sebastian, so that Professor Sebastian can scold them for trying to interfere. However, when Ash demands to know what the fuck Team Rocket was up to and why they were trying to capture the red Gyarados, Professor Sebastian decides to tell them about Project R, stating that it stood for Project Revolution, so that he could explain to Ash and the gang how they had actually indirectly helped with the project. He essentially explained that the entire point of Project Revolution was to send in radio waves which would force Pokemon to evolve. Ash and the gang immediately countered with how wrong it was to force Pokemon to evolve, stating that that was disrupting nature, since Pokemon were supposed to evolve naturally. However, Professor Sebastian countered back that evolving Pokemon through unnatural methods, such as the radio waves, actually caused them to develop differences between their regular counterparts, as well as make them stronger, citing the red Gyarados obviously having a difference between the regular blue Gyarados, and explaining that the Gyarados' red coloring was likely due to Gyarados having an extra trait from its previous form of Magikarp, solely because it wasn't ready to evolve yet. So apparently in the anime, shinies could be created by forcing evolution? Damn, I did not know that. Sebastian then further stated that the overall goal of Project R was to see what other differences forcing a Pokemon to evolve could make the Pokemon have, hoping that it would make them stronger, as it clearly had the Gyarados, as the Gyarados was very powerful with its Hydro Pumps, and it was also very angry after the evolution, which in turn just made it even more powerful, stating his belief that the waves could make the Mons angry, and therefore make them more powerful when they evolved. As Professor Sebastian continues his long-ass exposition dump, the boat then docks back at Team Rocket's base as several grunts who were at the base begin unloading the net and loading the Gyarados onto a crane so they could get ready to transport it. Jesse, James, and Meowth are then freed from the net as well, allowing them to go onto the boat to report to Professor Sebastian and Tyson, who congratulate them on their work. Professor Sebastian then gets back to his exposition, talking once again about how Team Rocket's goal was to get an army of super strong evolved Pokemon with the radio waves, which Team Rocket overhear, which makes them realize that the radio waves could have potentially turned Meowth into a Persian, and they question Dr. Sebastian on why it didn't. And Ash and the gang also question Professor Sebastian on why their Pokemon didn't evolve when they were hit by the waves as well. This leads Sebastian to admit to them that he was unsure, stating that that was the specific reason why he captured the Gyarados in the first place, was so that he could conduct experiments on it to find out why it had evolved and the other mons hadn't. Ash and the gang proceed to make fun of Sebastian for not knowing the details of his own plan, but this leads Sebastian to taunt Ash and the gang, stating that they had in fact helped him unknowingly, as now, thanks to Ash and the gang's interference with Poliwhirl and Totodile, he was able to see that the radio waves also made certain Pokemon tired, so even if it couldn't be used to make certain mons evolve, he could at least use it as a weapon to weaken certain mons, to make them easier to catch, since they would be tired. Ash and the gang are furious at Professor Sebastian for essentially using them as pawns for his plan, but Professor Sebastian orders Tyson to shut them up by locking them in a cage now, which Tyson does. Once they had all gotten back to the base on their boat. Thankfully, even with Ash and the gang now locked in a cage though, not all hope was lost, as Lance had overheard Professor Sebastian's whole exposition dump, and now he knew of Team Rocket's plans, so he could stop them. Anyways, Jesse, James, and Meowth were happy to see that Ash and the gang were now locked up, and they were even happier when Tyson and Professor Sebastian congratulated them on a job well done once again, and decided to reward Team Rocket with yet another feast, which they enjoyed in the kitchen. Back at the base, it seemed as though the food would never end. And Team Rocket certainly never got to see the end, as before they could finish their food, Tyson then returned and explained that it was now time for the next phase of Project R to begin, and clarified that all Jesse and James had to do during this phase was watch over the base and the radar tower that emitted the radio waves. Jesse and James obliged, as Tyson left the kitchen again to go do his part in the next phase of the Project R, which involved him loading the red Gyarados from the crane it was put on into a transport truck, and then driving this truck to an unknown location, along with Sebastian and several Rocket grunts. Among these grunts was Lance, still in disguise, as he had a plan to save the Gyarados before they drove to wherever this location was. The episode then ends with Ash and the gang hearing the truck drive away from inside the cage in the base and declaring that they had to find a way to free themselves so that they could save Gyarados. Determined to not give up, unaware that Lance was on the truck,